We are online.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gabriele Carrer. I'm a journalist at Italian news website formiche.net. This is a webinar titled Cybersecurity, the Meaning of National Perimeters. Thank you, Festival della Democrazia, for having me. Thank you to the speakers with us this morning. Professor Roberto Viola and Undersecretary Angelo Toffano cannot be present this morning. They apologize and send their greetings. So this webinar will be introduced by Mr. Roberto Viola, Director General at DG Connect of the European Commission. After his introduction, each speaker will have a first round of 7 minutes of questions and a possible second round of 3 minutes. It is possible to ask questions to our speaker via chat. I am very quick. So Director General Viola, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I think today you are debating a very important subject for Europe, for the digital future of Europe. And as you know, unfortunately, these days our life is mainly digital, as it is this event. And I think everybody realized the importance of connectivity, the importance of linking each other with digital tools, using data to get out of this very, very deep crisis. Now, with the digital also, that's the good face of it, which, I mean, it is right now, it's the way to keep our society together, to keep our economy going, but it's the bad side as well. And the more digital is our society, the more the risks are for our society. And this is what we debate today, and I really welcome a panel of experts that will go inside the topics. And in particular, today, we are discussing what exactly the public powers should do, what exactly, how exactly to contain, to understand the risks which are inherent with the operation of critical infrastructures, and what to do best. In this respect, you know, when it comes to security, to state matters, there could be two reflexes. The first one is to do a little bit of political action to show to companies, to citizens that the state is present, but in reality, you are creating a kind of bureaucracy. And the other one is to really do things, and things which are necessary. So all the actions of the European Commission, starting with the adoption of the NIS directive, the first strategy, the second, the establishment of ENISA, I hope now in very short term, the establishment of a competence center, the establishment of a cybersecurity certification strategy is, of course, to go in the direction of the second option, which is do things, try to be as less bureaucratic as possible, but at the same time be effective. When we look at the ENISA threat landscape for the months and the years to come, I don't think, especially the experts in the panel, will be very surprised to read what the ENISA sees. The types of threats are of two different natures. The first one comes from criminal exploitation for the purpose of making money of a cyber attack, which is directed towards people, assets, and companies. Unfortunately, we have seen during the COVID crisis that this number of attacks, especially socially engineered attacks, are increasing in the general population, in micro enterprises. And one of the characteristics of those attacks is that very often we don't know about them. People don't actually tell. We have been told by business associations that micro enterprises, for instance, I mean, an hotel, a restaurant, sometimes is targeted with a ransomware, and they prefer not to tell, just to pay, because they feel their reputation is at stake. Now, this is an increasing trend, which is very worrying. And I think we have to instigate a culture, which is a culture which we call of cyber hygiene, with the people and micro enterprises that they protect their assets. But also we need to help. We need to do more in terms of education. We need to do more in terms of protecting those weaker links in the society. And then you have, of course, the protection of much larger infrastructures, where also those infrastructure and those companies could be targeted of criminals, but not only criminals, because then the more strategic is the infrastructure, the higher is the risk that actually this an attack engineered by with the political intent or by having the purpose of destabilizing our democracy, it's likely, it's possible, as any other hybrid threat that can be in our society. So in this case, of course, our primary objective is to defend our critical infrastructure, to defend the integrity, the resilience of our productive system, our communication system, and also, of course, to be very clear, when engaging in international relationship with our partners around the world, we have to be extremely outspoken by saying we don't tolerate cyber attacks from our trading partners. And I think the Union in this respect has been very clear. And the way of being clear is that a regulation has been adopted, which allows the Union to impose sanctions on individuals, on companies that are found responsible of a cyber attack against European interests. And as you know, during the summer, we actually have sanctioned already a number of individuals and companies outside Europe, and other investigations are ongoing. So we are extremely serious about this, and this is one of the effective tools that we should maintain. I mean, being sure that we send a message that we are not going to tolerate external attacks. And of course, we need a lot of prevention. And we need to work together on the three phases of the life cycle of cybersecurity: the prevention, the handling of an accident, and the investigation after the accident to understand exactly what happened. If I go to the first stage, which is the prevention, the essential element of prevention is information. Without being informed of what's going on, without understanding the weaknesses, potential weaknesses of systems and infrastructure, we will never be protected. And these days, when we talk about prevention, we talk about also a technological response that must be there, which means that we need to use artificial intelligence, we need to use big data, we need to use supercomputing. And that's the intention, looking at now what the European Commission will do when we will establish the European Competence Center, linking the national competence centers. And the intention is clearly to make sure that each national center can have the best of the technology available, and there's good cooperation of those centers. When it comes also to prevention, it's important that the voluntary disclosure of discovered weaknesses of products and services continues. And this is something that we need to make sure that producers are disclosing. Those disclosures are made available in order to make sure that there are wise choices in terms of choice of the supplier, but also the supplier themselves continue to improve. Security of supply chain, it's a very, very important element of the prevention. And I'm not sure there's enough culture these days about the security of suppliers and supply chain. When looking at the new rules, the new cybersecurity rules of Europe, the so-called revision of the NIS directive, which we will present by the end of the year, these elements of cooperation, prevention, protection of critical infrastructure, and security of supply will be looked at very, very attentively. When in looking at the security of supply, of course, we look at all very closely to critical infrastructure, such as, power distribution system, water distribution system, supply of basic ingredients that make our society stable, resilient, and functioning. So things like also financial services. But of course, last but not least, telecom services as well, and telecom infrastructure. As you know, we have done a work which has been a coordinated work with all the member states, looking in particular at the security of 5G supply. Why we have done this? Because we believe 5G is a revolutionary technology that will change for better our society and will connect everything from cars to hospitals, to dispatching centers, to airports. So I named few of the things. You clearly understand if there's a security problem, we will have a very serious problem. That's why the wonders of 5G have to go together with a very attentive examination of the security of the supply chain. We have done a coordinated work. We have reached a technical agreement with the experts of the member states on how to identify security of 5G supply and what are the remedies in terms of making sure that especially in essential function, only trusted supplier can supply the equipments. The European Council, so the heads of states or government on the 1st and 2nd of October, have approved this work and have said that this is the way forward for 5G security. And I think the work we have done in 5G, it's a new way of working together with Europe and the member states. It's a way that basically we identify together what is the issue, we identify together what is the remedy. And we then publish what we call a toolbox with what is needed to be done. And now, of course, we are following very closely the implementation of the 5G toolbox, making sure that every member state does what is necessary. Now, when it comes to handling the accident, of course, we need to make sure that when it happens, and this could be a large accident, there's enough help being given to, for instance, one member state which is in difficulty. And that's why we are looking very closely to the idea of flying doctors of cybersecurity, which we call a cyber unit, which basically can give support when it's necessary. And this is a very important issue, giving support when it's necessary. We have seen during the pandemic what it means, being isolated, what it means not receiving support from other member states. We don't want to see this happening in cybersecurity. And then in the ex-post evaluation, we need to collectively learn. So this is the architecture of the European cybersecurity strategy, being resilient by the use of technology, looking at the three phases of the cycle of cybersecurity, making sure that we link excellence centers, making sure we have attention to the security of supply chains. And whatever we can do that those kind of, this kind of architecture finds a good way to be implemented in member states, this would be, of course, going in the right direction. I want to signal as a last point that the recovery fund that Europe has decided, which is an unprecedented help to boost up our economy in this time of crisis, this recovery fund has 20%, which will be devoted to digital in general. And of course, we have included in the list of recommended investment in cybersecurity. So turning at Italy, I think Italy has embraced the cybersecurity culture, which is good, has done certain steps in the right direction, and now has the opportunity to use the recovery fund to increase the resilience of the ecosystem and to improve also the technological response. So I look forward to the debate. Unfortunately, I cannot stay with you. But I really wish you the best, and I will. My team is listening attentively, and they will report to me the topics that you will discuss, and I will look at them with a lot of interest. So thank you very much again for the invitation.
Thank you, Director General. Have a good day, and thanks for your contribution. Director General talked about, said Italy has done certain steps in the right direction. Last week, the first of 4 decrees that will bring about Italy digital perimeter within a year has been signed by Italian government official. The perimeter will effectively be Italy's first line of defense in the digital field. And let's talk about that with Corrado Giustossi, cybersecurity expert at Agenzia per l'Italia Digitale. Corrado, can you please talk about this important development in the Italian area?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having invited me in this very interesting seminar. Yes, Gabriele, what you mentioned is at the moment of the most recent, the last step of a very long journey Italy started a few years ago. When it comes to national cybersecurity in Europe, everything began in 2013 when Europe adopted the so-called European cyber strategy, which stated some fundamental principles and asked member states to do something all together, to cooperate, because the Commission realized that in cybersecurity, we need to cooperate and to help each other. So each and every member state established at least one national CERT. CERT means Computer Emergency Response Team. Now the preferred word is CSERT, Computer Security Incident Response Team, but at least they are almost the same. So in 2014, Italy established its national CERTs, two actually, one for the public sector and one for the private sector. They worked together and together with the European institutions and the European CERT, the CERT EU, in Italy until May 18 this year, when Italy, according to its our implementation of the NIS directive, established a new structure which is called the Italian CSERT, established into the presidency of the Council of the Ministers, and those previous governmental CERTs transferred their services and activities to this new structure, which was, as I said, established according to the Italian implementation of the NIS directive, which sees all the responsibilities for national cybersecurity go to the presidency of the Council of the Ministers. At the same time, or at least a couple of years later, but conceptually was the same time, Italy established a national law, which is not a direct, consequence of NIS directives. Is anonymous national law, which is the so-called national perimeter, which is, I can say, the complement to one to the NIS directive, in that as long as NIS directive targets what were called the critical infrastructures and now are called the operator of essential services, which are far more than the old critical infrastructures. that is, those operators whose work and services is essential for the functioning of the civil society. The perimeter targets those operators whose work and services are essential for the security of the state itself, which is not necessarily the same thing. The operator of essential services are not the same operators that work for the security of the Republic. So the decree you mentioned that was approved a couple of days ago belongs to this Italian law, which targets the security of the state itself. And it is a very important step towards how to say, a whole and complete cybersecurity shield for Italy, because the NIS directive covers a certain number of services, and the perimeter covers the other half of the services. It is, as you mentioned, one of several decrees that has to be announced in the near future, because the path, the journey is very long to implement the perimeter, and the blueprint is the same of the NIS directive. First, the competent authorities have to identify which subjects are to be included into the perimeter. Then those subjects have to be notified. Of course, everything is under secret. The name and number of operators will not be disclosed by the government, but they will be notified, and they will have to communicate with the authorities and at first tell them the map of the infrastructures they use and the services they give in a standard format that has to be decided. Then the authorities will set on a set of rules of cybersecurity measures that those operators have to comply with. And this will be the object of a next decree. If everything goes according to the schedule, we are a little bit late because of the COVID disease, of course, but if everything goes according to the schedule, towards next spring, everything should be in place and the perimeter will be fully functional. That is.
Thank you, Corrado. We talk about the European dimension, the NIS directive, the Italian perimeter. So I think that Laura Carpini, which is the cybersecurity coordinator at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Italian cooperation, is the best person to ask for more comments, a few additional comments. So thanks to the perimeter, does Italy confirm itself as a leading country in the European Union in the cybersecurity arena?
Thank you, Gabriele, and good morning all, and to all panelists and to the audience. I thank you for this invitation, which enables me to give you perhaps also an overview of what we do at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because I'd like to take a little small step back here and mention that the unit, the department I'm now heading within the Political Directorate General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has been recently created in last spring. So for the first time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided to establish a whole structure that within the Political Directorate deals mainly with cyber diplomacy. Because as other panelists, more authorities detailedly than I do, have underlined how a pervasive digitalization and the incidence and importance of digital infrastructures and processes have acquired in our lives, cyber diplomacy becomes of paramount importance because every nation, borders are blurred. The incidence of attacks is rising, and we have witnessed this with the pandemic as well. So it is important that our ministry has created this structure in order to follow and lead our national diplomatic action in this field. Now, having said that, the perimeter has also a diplomatic perspective to be looked upon. And of course, as the panelist before me has said, it inscribes itself into a European pattern. The perspective is, of course, that all our national architecture is to be considered within the general framework of the European Union, and it is consistent with the principal instruments that have been mentioned, like the ANS directive, but also the recent ENISA regulation or the 5G toolbox. Now, what is important from the diplomatic and intra-European relation in this case is that the national perimeter is a bit one of the latest practical and concrete realization of the European vision, and it's something that being so recent and being so ambitious in a way, it can serve a bit as a model, or at least an important and very useful comparison, terms of comparison for other countries that are currently updating, I would say, their national architecture. Because you see, perhaps in many countries, I don't know, perhaps Estonia or other, the Czech Republic, France itself, so they have all started early in building a national cybersecurity architecture. However, their vision, I will not enter into details because I'm not really too familiar on this, but they started so early that perhaps are missing the current picture that is important. And therefore, even coming now, we take the advantage of having devised current challenges, the importance of the safety and the security of the supply chain, and being ready to respond to new challenges like, for instance, 5G or new technologies that are emergencies. So the most important features of the perimeter that I would underline here is that it has a very a vision of unity of the entire administration, and it is a strategic one because in a way it is open to new transformation. Dr. Giustozzi mentioned that some decrees will be signed, and the latest one that has been signed contained a not public list of entities and administrations that are subject to the perimeter. But that one is not it's not written in the stone. It can be updated and modified according to necessity. And also it projects an image of the perimeter of awareness of what is part of your own security as a nation. That's really an important feature because it transfers a notion of, again, awareness and also contribution to the wider building of a wider structure at the European level, and I would say later also at the international level. Therefore, it is also an assumption of responsibility to our common European home. And as I said, I think it can be considered as a very useful example also for other countries that will be updating their national architectures. If you allow me, I would also mention that this applies not only to the European level, but to the international level. We know that currently the United Nations are debating cybersecurity issues within the open-ended working group at the United Nations, for instance. And there too, we are participating in this effort with the solidity, again, of this national architecture that is a part of a wider effort of building an international an international system based on rule of law, democratic values, but very, very aware of its own security and what needs to be done to be ready to prevent, as Director Viola said, respond and mitigate afterwards. I would stop here and perhaps later continue the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Carpini. Thanks for your time and your contribution. So I'd like to ask Rahab Shalom Revivo a few questions. So she's the FinTech and Cyber Innovations Manager at the Ministry of Finance in Israel. And last year, I visited the Cyber Park in Beersheba in Israel, and I heard so many times the word ecosystem. I spent just a few hours in the Cyber Park in Beersheba, and I think that 200 times I heard this word, and is an important word for Israel and for the system of the cyber tech in the cyber security in Israel. So an Italian association, the Cyber Area, is trying to develop such kind of cyber park in Italy. So Rahab, can you please talk about the Beersheba Park and in particular the national financial cyber ecosystem in Israel? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Rahab Shalom Revivo. I'm from the Israeli Ministry of Finance. I'm FinTech and Cyber Innovations Manager. And with regards to ecosystem, we have several types, several levels of ecosystem in Israel. We can speak about the financial ecosystem. I'm coming from the Israeli Financial CERT, which is a center that provides cybersecurity protection to the financial ecosystem on a national level. And in the financial CERT, we have all of the financial institutions connected in order to work together, on one hand, to consume services from the financial CERT, but on another level, to share information, to share threat intelligence, data about attacks, and to get help and support in cases of incidents, one from another, and also from the national level, from government entities and government relations that we have. And the financial CERT is providing a set of services to its customers, and the customers are all of the financial institutions in Israel. It is, and the services are, first of all, information sharing about threats, vulnerabilities, about recommendations that we have in case of a problem. We are also helping with incident handling. For example, in cases where the incident requires to activate the police or requires to activate the another CERT around the globe to take down a phishing website. So we are helping with incidents as well. And also incident response teams that can arrive to a financial institution in order to help and support in case of a real attack. So here I'm speaking about a logical ecosystem in which all of the financial institutions are connected, working together in order to help and protect each other. We have a broader ecosystem, which is physical. The financial CERT is part of Israel's national CERT, a center that is in charge of all of the operational activities in Israel to protect the entire ecosystem. And in that national CERT, we have many sectorial CERTs, like the financial one, but also we have one for transportation, one for energy, and so on and so forth, in order to make sure that each one of the sectors is protected. And because of the fact that we're physically located together, sitting together, working on the same technology, on the same infrastructure, we can share and support each other in case of attacks that cross sectors. And we can see many attacks like that. On top of that, the national CERT is located in Beersheba. Beersheba is a city in Israel which is far from the center of Israel, far from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem that you probably heard about. And we wanted to help and create an ecosystem that is high-tech related, that is cybersecurity related. Israel is known as a startup nation and as a cyber nation, and we wanted to bring that to the periphery as well. So in Beersheba, we created the government created a cyber park in which we have many entities. We have the government on one hand bringing their own needs, requirements, expertise to the table. We have a very big university that is located very close to the park with all of the students working in the park. We have small startups working in the park, as well as having also very big legacy organizations, VCs, innovation hubs that are part of the park. All are working hand in hand together in order to create that ecosystem. And speaking about innovation, we also have a fintech cyber innovation hub, for example, that is government supported. The financial CERT provides data, financial cyber data, guidance, mentoring, and so on to that financial cyber hub, but it is owned by the private sector. It is owned by private financial companies in order to bring their needs to the table. So all in all, we have different levels, different types of ecosystems. Part of them are logical, part of them are physical, all working together in order to promote the cybersecurity protection of the entire country. And in the next round, I can speak more about the international collaboration that we have around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahab. Thanks for your speech. So I'd like to ask a few questions to Morten Land, which is the General Manager Italy at Kaspersky Lab. And the most important thing I'd like to cover with him is how a major company like Kaspersky can collaborate in case of Italy in the perimeter verification process. So, Mr. Land, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Gabriele, thank you for the invitation this morning, and thank you to the panelists for the first indications from your side. It's been very interesting to hear your points so far. So it's so I represent a private company that is working on cyber topics and scenarios for a long time, and I think that we've touched a lot of really important elements so far in the discussion. We discussed local definitions of the entities that need to be within this perimeter. We had a short discussion about the global aspects and the diplomacy aspects, and I think that from our view this is really important because we're looking at a global problem. We need to protect ourselves locally, but the rules that we need to use and the legislation we put in place doesn't apply to the people that attack. So it's very likely that the attack on a Italian entity will not be done by people that speak Italian, as I speak, because it's very difficult to determine who is actually behind the attacks in very frequent in the cases. So it's difficult for us to do the attribution, but it's very likely that the attackers will be somewhere else, and it's very likely that they will speak another language, and it's very likely that they do not care about the rules and legislation that we put in place in Italy or in other countries or on European level. So it is a global problem, and that's the way we need to approach it, and it becomes even more difficult for us when we keep this in mind, because it's difficult to set up on a local level, difficult to set up on a European level, and it becomes even more complex to do it on a global level with the diplomacy aspects and the geopolitics in mind as well. So there's a lot of work that we can do in order to improve the communication flows, the legislation that we put in place, the way we want to work between the different entities, law enforcement also on a global level, for sure, can do a lot more in order to help us. And it is about communicating and sharing information very often. So if this is not in place, then the risk is that we will work a lot more to protect ourselves and do the same work a number of times. And we see this happening all the time. So there's some constant factors in what we see, and it's very much the same. It's just that the numbers become higher and higher. So we see that the number of attacks and then the new malwares that are being produced in order to attack different entities increase. That's always been the case. Kaspersky talked about this 10 years ago, and we talked about it still. So numbers go up, more malware, more attacks, more complex attacks, especially during the pandemic. I read an interesting article yesterday in an Italian newspaper saying that they said the crime rate on a number of fields had gone down, while the crime rate related to cyber attack had gone up quite a lot, and that corresponds with what we see. Before the pandemic, we had more or less 330,000 new samples to process a day. Now we reached 400,000, so it's a quite significant increase in just a few months. And it's very likely that this will continue, because it makes sense for them to move. The criminals will move faster than we can come up with legislation in order to protect ourselves, faster than we can come up with the best solutions to protect our infrastructure. So it's very easy for them just to move, go with the flow where they can make the money, and they just keep on increasing the pressure. Okay, so we can deal with this, and I think that the companies that work with cyber don't necessarily lose sleep over the volume in those cases, because it's about machine learning, artificial intelligence. So we have in place systems that can pick up a higher number of malware and attacks. But a lot comes down also to the local resources and the way we respond locally. And I think that I hope that the defined perimeter and the companies and the entities within the perimeter will not come into this category. But we see that a lot of companies still have lots to do because they're not prepared for what's going to happen. So, in this moment, it's not about if it's going to happen, it's very often about when. So if you're a target, then it's just a question of when it's going to happen, and you need to be prepared. And we still see that companies are not prepared for this, so they still believe that it's not going to happen. They still believe that it's something that we read about in the paper. And when somebody manages to breach their perimeter, then very often they don't even know about it, unless it's a crypto locker that maybe blocked their production environment, and then it's immediate damage, and you see, of course, immediately what's happening. But very often this is something that takes time. It's very often something hidden. Very often it's something that that this appears to be a clear motive, but maybe it's not. Maybe there was another motive hidden, and very often when you pull up your systems again, then you get the surprise. So all these things here, you need to be prepared, and the companies are still not prepared for this. Okay, we still find that when we respond to incidents, important incidents, Italian companies that have to turn off their systems during the weekend because they're under attack. And this tends to happen on Saturday night because the attackers tend to pick the weekends for these kind of attacks. They still don't have a plan, so they don't know what to do, and they don't know who's going to be calling who. And we spend maybe the first 2 days just agreeing the processes with the customer, when we should really be working on protecting them and getting them back on track again. So it's about procedures, processes, it's about training of staff. Okay, it's the fact that they most likely don't have the right stuff in place to do this, so they need to seek help outside. So if this is not defined before it happens, then you're going to find yourself in trouble when you need to do it on a Saturday night, and there's no framework in place to do so. So these are so complex, these scenarios, and they're so damaging. We see it on, if not a daily basis, at least frequently every week. We see Italian companies that are under attack, and they're still not prepared for it, and the result is devastating for it. So I think that all this info sharing, all these scenarios where we sit and talk and work with the private sector together with the public sector, info sharing, threat intel becomes crucial. So sharing threat intel is a good way of fighting crime. And if you put in place good processes to share this, which is difficult, of course, because we're talking about very sensitive topics, and sometimes it's difficult to get this working properly. But it's something that must work properly, because if you don't share this information correctly, then it's not going to be difficult for the attackers to continue to do their work. So it's so complex picture, and we see that this happens more and more and more. And during the pandemic, it's only increased. It's only becoming even more difficult to do so. Also, priorities have changed during the pandemic, which is understandable when maybe the company has been forced to shut down certain parts of the production, or people are not working as they did before, or maybe they're facing very difficult financial problems because of the pandemic, and maybe the project that they have to protect their factories, their ambitious plan to protect the production environment that they know needs protection. Maybe it's moving again. Maybe they're planning on doing it next year instead of this as they wanted initially. And this is a big problem. So we see that the budgets are shifting, and the priorities are changing, and it leaves even more open doors for the attackers. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think that there's a lot of forums as well where we're discussing this now. We're coming up with ideas. It's becoming more and more possible to share information. I see that doors are opening also on threat intel scenarios, where people are more happy to share and help each other today. So there's some positive signs as well.
Thank you, Morten. Thank you. So another company which is working about cybersecurity is Digi2all in the UK. I'm pleased to introduce you Colin Campbell, which is the Chief Executive Officer at Digi2all, and his company is working with several agencies in the British government for cybersecurity. So please, Colin, talk about your work with the British government, how you work with British government in cybersecurity arena. Colin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be in this debate. It is fascinating, and it is very complex. So just a brief insight into the work that Digi2all do in the UK. We've been working over the last 8 years to develop digital services for the UK government. The online services are used by clients in central government ministries, in local government, in healthcare, and in defence. One example of one of our projects is working with the Royal Navy in the UK on their data and AI transformation program. So this was started 3 years ago to develop a new data capability and new AI applications to help the Royal Navy enable change through technology in a digital information revolution. There's an interesting quote from the first Sea Lord, George Zambellis, who instigated the program. And his quote is that the future performance in war will be dominated by the relentless and competitive exploitation of data, whether that is under the sea, on the sea, in the air, and in space. It will be all together. So if we think a few years ahead, when we have low orbit satellites, when we have 5G, when we have an environment where your data could be overseas, it could be in a cabinet that is in a completely different country. One of the questions that we need to think about when we're looking at security of a perimeter is where that perimeter is, and do you understand where it is, and can you have access? But just to explain a bit more about how we work, so at Digital, we're always concerned about user needs and about services. So technology delivers a service. That's what we as users consume. The technology is really a means to an end. And we really encourage a deeper understanding of the problem. We do a lot of discovery research work before we go anywhere near understanding a technology solution. And this in-depth research often uncovers new ways of thinking, and even for very broad areas, it can provide good orientation. In our approach, it's critical that our clients that we work for own the services that we're developing. And I think this is an important relationship aspect in terms of the introduction at the start around the impact of the state and bureaucracy, because it's essential that people that own the service don't outsource responsibility, that they feel 100% able to be accountable for the service. So that means that we often have to provide academy education. So working with the Royal Navy, these are professional sailors, they're military people, they don't understand about digital services. So our first job has been to provide an academy to help educate the Royal Navy to be owners of their own services and product owners, so that we can work for them and they retain responsibility. So thinking about cybersecurity and what service ownership and service design means in this sense, of course, with cybersecurity, there are no absolutes. There's no such thing as a 100% secure system. In the end, cybersecurity is all about risk management. It's about judgment and trying to make your adversaries' lives harder. And part of that, as well as all the good work that has been outlined so far, is about having a more resilient service. So this not only makes your attacker's life more difficult, it's much less attractive as a target because it's much able to self-heal and bounce back. So that kind of encourages us to ask the question, which is, what are the real problems that need addressing regarding national infrastructure? So improving cybersecurity is always a very good thing, but this won't necessarily improve resilience. Last year, if I'd have sat here and said, imagine having a major cyber outage in the middle of a pandemic, people would probably have thought I would be exaggerating. 12 months on, it's entirely believable that we could have a major outage in the middle of a pandemic. So when we look at resilience, we would be really interested in looking at the service that is being delivered to users before we look at the technology. And we would like to discover through research things like, do the national, regional and local contingency responses to the plans to critical incidents, do they align and work cohesively? Are they expressed in playbooks, and do people know how to use them? To give a very simple example of this, if you look at some of the big global companies that were victims of some of the recent cyber attacks, when the computer systems were switched off, the number one user need of the boards of those companies was to contact all of the countries and all of the operating companies to have a conversation to work out the extent of the damage. You can imagine sat in that meeting room that they were challenged with how to do that. Nobody had a telephone directory. We don't have telephone directories any longer. There wasn't a simple list of the telephone numbers to call the operating countries around the world, nor was there a means to do it because the telephones have all been removed. Everything is done in the computer. All of the information is in the computer, and the computer wasn't available. So, just a really simple example of, 1 minute past the cyber attack, what is the user need? It's to communicate. How are you going to communicate, and how do people know that that is going to be your means of communication if it isn't in a playbook and if you haven't told them? So when we look at user needs, this is the type of research that we would like to bring forth and say, okay, how do we make a more resilient system? Another very brief example is to look at the infrastructure itself. So potentially with supply chain regulation and control, this is a very good thing in terms of looking at the security of the supply chain. It may also, though, as an unintended consequence, lead to supply rationalization. And let's say if that means that you end up with all of your control panels in all of your infrastructure is provided by a single supplier, that whilst that supplier is compliant with your controls, it could be a very significant single point of failure. So balancing out the needs of the service and its resilience with the controls around things like supply chain and supplier compliance is really important. Linked in with that, when you're doing the discovery and the research around that, it's important to understand what your critical regenerative infrastructure is. And by that, I mean that if there is an attack and some of the infrastructure is unavailable, there is always a critical element that you need to regenerate the rest of the infrastructure. And understanding what your regenerative infrastructure is, then you can make different plans to make that available and potentially to protect it, but also to duplicate it. So our focus is always on the user needs, the service needs, and designing very resilient services. It might be that the questions I posed, the simple examples, are not the right questions to ask, but starting to think deeply about the problem and what really needs to be addressed is a good place to start finding the right questions to ask. And that is the way that we would advocate working in a very user-centric way and thinking about services much more than just the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Thanks for your interesting speech. So I'd like to have a second very, very quick round of questions. So I'd like to start with Corrado Giustozzi and ask him what next for the Italian perimeter. And we talked about the first of the further decrees for the digital perimeter. So what next with a view for the citizens, how citizens can approach to this new kind of approach from the Italian government?
Okay, well, what's next? As I said, there are a few missing steps to complete the perimeter. The operators have to be identified, the security measures have to be put in place, and all the pieces have to fit in this big picture, working with the other structures that are already functioning for the NIS directive, that is the CSERT and so on. To the citizen, the perimeter, I think, will not be visible or near, because it targets, as I mentioned, the security of the state itself. The NIS directive is much more close to the citizens in that it helps keep secure and resilient all those infrastructures which provide essential services to the community. so the citizens know can be assured that all those infrastructure on which we all rely, phone companies, energy, transportation, banks, and even non-material infrastructures such as search engines or services in the cloud will be protected against cyber attacks and disruption of other nature. Of course, the journey is not coming to an end, because the battle against cybercrime, cyber attacks is a never-ending story. Something more has to be put in place. The NIS directive itself is in those days under the first programmed review. It's a couple of years now that the NIS directive is in place. So all the member states and the Commission are revisioning the functioning of the NIS in order to understand what has went well and has not worked as planned, in order to set up a new version, possible new version of the directive in the near future. So the most important thing is that we are all working together at the national and European levels. The institutions are working together with private and public sectors and the citizens, and listening to the needs. As has been mentioned by Dr. Viola, ENISA has been powered last year with a very important Cybersecurity Act. ENISA is the cyber security agency of the EU. After 15 years, at the end, it received full powers and a full mandate. So ENISA is a very important piece of this big picture, working together with the institution, the CERTs, the governments, and so on. By the way, October is already ending, but as you probably know, October is the European month of the cybersecurity. Italy participates to this month with a few initiatives, but in other countries, there are many more initiatives. But this is a very important step that the Commission established a few years ago, exactly with the aim of reaching the citizen, letting the citizen know that there is an effort going on, and every institution in Europe is motivated to make the European cyberspace more safe and more secure for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Corrado. I have questions from the public. I'd like to ask you again to answer very, very quickly. So the questions is from Aura. She asked, in Italy, telecom supply chain are full of components produced by Chinese vendors. As Chinese national security legislation conflicts with Italian constitution, NIS, GDPR, and EU policies, what can we do? Well, I think it's a great opportunity to talk quickly about the golden power.
Yes, golden power is a very important aspect, of course. I mean, but there are other aspects. 5G is the tip of the iceberg, but it's not the whole problem. Europe has already targeted this problem with a special, orientation towards 5G, and Dr. Viola mentioned in high detail in his initial talk which initiatives Europe took for the 5G. But I'd like to highlight that Europe has also is targeting other more pervasive aspects of technology, smart devices, smart appliances, which are entering our houses and could be very dangerous because they do not, sometimes they do not comply with the GDPR or security measure. Europe has started a very important plan a couple of years ago with the Cybersecurity Act to put in place a certification mechanism common throughout Europe, which is aimed to assure the cybersecurity of those consumer smart devices, smart TVs, smart fridges, smart microwave ovens, you mentioned, which are becoming a very important part of our life, and of which we cannot rely on their security. That certification will bring in a clear way the assurance to the customer, to the citizen, that the device they build at the large distribution is actually safe and secure under a cyber security point of view. It's a very important effort that Europe is taking. It is the first in the world. It's the right response to the problem of products coming from, let's say, providers or countries you cannot rely, but it's not a political response. Other states in the world are acting against those technologies on a political level. Europe is tackling that on a technical point of view. We are setting out a set of rules, technical rules. Those products which I mean are work according to the rule that as I said, can be certified on a technical point of view, can be sold in Europe. Those products that do not comply with the certification scheme cannot be sold. It's not a matter of where are they coming from, but how are they functioning.
Thank you, Corrado. Thank you for your reply. I'd like to ask a question to Rahav Shalom Revivo. One is from the, maybe two questions, but the first question is from the public and from Marco Meyer. How do you evaluate Alibaba FinTech IPO with the Chinese legislation on national security? Is the first one from Marco, and an additional one from me. Just a few weeks ago, I joined an historic debate participated by the National Security Israeli National Cyber Directorate Chief, which is the Yigal Huna, and his Emirati counterpart. So I'd like you to tell us about the cooperation in cybersecurity in the Gulf and also with Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, with regards to the first question, I'm afraid that this is an area that is less relevant to me. Therefore, I'm afraid that maybe we can take it offline after that. With regards to the collaboration with the Emirates, the United Emirates, and also in general about international collaboration. So it's clear to us that mutual collaboration and cooperation and support is key. In the same manner that in Israel, internally, we are supporting each other in the financial ecosystem, cybersecurity-wise, it is clear for us that we must have that international collaboration as another layer of support. This is the only way that we can be the one step ahead of a hacker. The technology stack is not important, is not enough, and we need to have also information sharing and collaboration. So specifically with regards to Dubai, yes, that historic webinar that you participated in was amazing. It was truly amazing from our end as well. And one of the examples of collaboration that I have is a drill, a simulation that we're working on in Dubai's Expo, which is planned at the end of 2021. And in this Expo, which is a very big and long conference exhibition in Dubai, we're planning to run a financial cyber multilateral drill, meaning to have several countries, Ministry of Finance from several countries sitting together with the Emirates as well, sitting together around one table, having a financial cyber crisis, a cyber dramatic event in the financial ecosystem that causes a financial crisis that requires both national addressing and also international addressing to that crisis. So this is one of the examples of collaboration that we're working on, but this is not the only one. We have established the Financial Certs Forum, which is a forum in which there aren't many financial certs, financial cyber centers that are national in the world. So we have a forum in which the Italian Financial Cert is part of and participating as well, in which we are sharing information, sharing latest attacks and trends and recommendations, how to recover from them. And okay, we have noticed the following DDoS attack. Did you see the second wave? And so on and so forth, which is very valuable in enriching to all of the countries that participate in it. We have Israel in it, Italy, the Nordic Financial Cert, and the Swiss Financial Cert. There are many bilateral collaborations. Besides the cert-to-cert interaction, we're also collaborating with counterparts, Ministry of Finance, in order to share with them our intellectual property, our knowledge, ideas, both in the financial, cyber, and in fintech arenas. And on top of that, we really believe in sharing, and that sharing is caring. And this is why we are sharing not only with government officials or government entities, we are sharing also with international financial institutions, meaning we are sharing threat intelligence and information that is coming from the Israeli Financial Cert, the Israeli Financial Cyber Center, to financial institutions around the globe in order to help with knowledge that we have about attacks, about new actors, about recommendations and attack methods. Every time that we encounter something that is relevant for the global ecosystem, we make sure to share it. This is a lot of the time is one direction sharing from us to the financial global ecosystem, but it is something that is important and valuable and that we see as key in order for all of the good guys to be protected eventually. So I hope that this answers your question.
Thank you, Rahab. Thanks for your reply. I'd like to ask Morten Lan about the one theme that was central during our debate, which is the lack of knowledge. Is this the main threat to our security, in your opinion?
I think it's one of the most important factors. So so it should be our common objective to create a cyber culture that is not present today. Okay, so we need to work on a cyber culture. This is valid for government, private. It's valid for citizens. It's even valid for young people that are studying to become older now, and I see that we have a lot of them on the call this morning. So I think that the cyber culture that we need to strive towards is the responsibility of everyone, and this is about awareness, and it's about training people in different scenarios, and all the tools are available. So it's just a matter of putting it into system and using the tools and the information that we have in place, and there's not enough focus on it. We talk about it frequently, and every time we have deep debates and meetings like the one we had this morning, we always talk about it, but when you translate it into real action, it's very often not sufficient, in my opinion, and we're not at the right level. And I think that this is something that we should strive towards. And again, it's not even about buying important or complex systems, which you can buy, of course, but it's about creating this cyber culture in the country, and training people on the different levels. And then of course also at some point you also have to train the experts, and you need some of the real experts in place as well to respond to some of these difficulties that we discussed this morning. And there we also see a big gap when it comes to resources available. So there's not enough experts available to do the work we need to do in this moment. But again, yes, the training topic for me is something that is very close to heart, and also I personally work a lot with young people as well, trying to underline the importance and get this into the system, and work with the schools and work with the government to try to touch these subjects in a structured way. I think this will give us a lot of leverage in the future if we manage to do it properly.
Thank you, Morten. I have a question for Laura Carpini, which is linked to the topic of cyber diplomacy. Davide Maniscalco is asking, could you please give us your opinion about a cyber defense offensive approach? Laura, you're muted.
Can you repeat the question, please? It's my opinion on cyber defense.
Offensive approach to the cyber defense.
Well, in a national capacity, you know that our constitution has mainly a defensive approach and vision. So for each of the offensive capacities are pretty ruled out, and as a diplomat, I work in the field of diplomacy, which is mainly trying to establish dialogue, preventive measures, and preventive measures, building confidence, and we do this, for instance, within the European Union Cyber Diplomacy Toolbox, which was approved in 2017, and is precisely what it says, a sort of toolbox that enables the EU to be active on the international stage with preventive measures, stability measures, confidence building measures, and also response measures and restrictive measures. So, for instance, as Director General Viola just mentioned, the EU has made use of these sanctions, which are the restrictive measures that I just mentioned very recently, in two sets, one in July and one just last week. So being diplomat doesn't mean that you don't respond. There are ways to respond to incidents. There are ways to make sure that you are able to deter One other thing is to do offensive capabilities. That lies. I know that many countries are developing those. Few countries are developing those. We, as foreign affairs, we do with diplomacy, and that's our core business, and that's what we think the world should be doing. Dialogue more, builds confidence, and nationally avoid offensive attitudes that are not our core business. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. I have a question for Colin Campbell. I know that your approach to cyber threats is multi-level. You work on national, regional, and local response plan. Is this the right approach for a cybersecurity for cybersecurity threats?
Sorry, Gabriella, is your question, should the cybersecurity response be multi-level, and what the advantages are?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, please.
So, I mean, cybersecurity is extremely complex area. I think that everything we've talked about is really important. The threats are continuing to develop, and still then you get a sense that it's still not enough. So we would advocate a multi-level response, definitely on the local, regional and national level, and not to lose sight of the user needs. So for instance, in the financial sector, it's really important to do everything to protect the banking system. A good user needs question to ask is, in the event of the loss of the internet, can the banks still distribute money? Can they give cash out? So in the event of the collapse of a financial system or a temporary loss of the internet to the financial system, can the banks still distribute money? Because that's a really good resilience question around the user needs. So if I put myself as a user, we are all users of services. That's why user-centered design is a really simple practice to do. You know, what do you need from your bank? And often, if I can't pay electronically, I will just need some cash. And if the bank can provide that, whether or not they have access to the internet and they have their full systems, it doesn't necessarily affect me as a user. And therefore, as well as doing the multi-level cybersecurity responses, also having one eye on user-centric resilience design is a good way to do it. Like my previous example of being able to contact people and having these resilience plans in a playbook and having that well understood. Resilience is about everybody being able to do something. And in the pandemic, that's really been demonstrated. You know, you are more resilient as a society if everybody can do something. So the more that you can distribute it and have that design known, potentially the more resilient your design is. It's not a replacement for cybersecurity, it's in addition to it. So we would advocate multi-level, but also look at resilience through addressing the minimum viable product to satisfy user needs. In the case of the bank, providing me with cash. In time, I need my full banking systems, but immediately I would just need some cash. So multi-level, both security and resilient by design.
Thank you, Colin. We are running out of time, so I'd like to thank the Festival of della Diplomazia, Diplomacy Festival, for this event, for having me. I'd like to thank Director General Viola, Professor Baldoni, and Undersecretary Toffolo for their greetings, and Laura Carpini from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Corrado Giustozzi, Colin Campbell, Morten Lan, and okay. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to thank all the speakers and all the public, and thank you for having me. Have a good day. See you. Bye and shalom.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.